today, Thursday, March the 16th, 1972, from Ponca City, Oklahoma. We are interviewing Dr. W.A. Franklin of Ponca City, Oklahoma, for the Living Legends Library, Oklahoma Christian College. Dr. Franklin is a longtime resident of Oklahoma. Dr. Franklin, let's start this interview right off by getting a little information about you and your family and your background when you were real young.
I thank you. I was born at Blue Grove, Texas, in 1887. And my father was a Confederate soldier for 2 years, and my mother's people moved from Tennessee to Texas in 1854, to Sherman, Texas. My father and mother moved west with the frontier and were in the cattle business, as many of my relatives were. But they ran into difficulties. The tick fever wiped them out. I don't know what time, but sometime before my birth. And my father and mother then lived on an acreage, a small farm near Blue Grove, Texas. I went to school there till I was about the 5th grade. Then I had a brother 2 years younger. My father and mother thought that there wouldn't be enough opportunities for us there in that neighborhood, and so they decided to move to Oklahoma. They came to the Cheyenne Arapaho country years after the first opening, which was for 1892. Then we came in the summer of 98 to the claim that my father had previously taken northwest of Cordell, Oklahoma. We came in then, as I said, in the summer, and dug a trench back in the side of the hill and built a one-room house with materials we brought from our cow shed in Texas. And then we couldn't move in the summertime because my father had a small herd of cattle, and the Oklahomans didn't like the Texas cattle because of the tick fever. We had to wait till November to come. Then we had 2 covered wagons and 2 cowboys. My brother and my sister and grandmother and father and mother. We came out through the Caddo and Comanche Kiowa country, and one night we camped inside of Fort Sill and heard the booming of the cannon at sun up the next day. Then we came on, and the Indians had set the prairie fire, so it was reported, and we traveled inside of a prairie fire for 2 days. At the end of that 2 days, there came a big rain, which turned into snow, and we camped on Rainy Mountain Creek near what is now Mountain View, and the cowboys pulled down an arbor that had camp meeting in, and started a fire, and we cut down some big trees and built a big fire outdoors. And in a tent, we put coals in a big iron kettle for my grandmother to keep warm by. After the snow, we came on in to Ouachita County and crossed the line without any difficulty or being challenged at all, and came into our claim. We had no feed. Of course, we'd raised no feed, and we traded horses, 2 horses, to a neighboring German farmer for corn to get us through the winter, the rest of the winter. And never was spring more welcome than that year when we were so short of feed and wanted spring to come, spring grass. Well, we had pretty hard for a year or two, and my interest has been mostly in school. Since then, we didn't go to school at all. My brother and me did not go to school, my brother and I, at all that year. The second year, my sister taught a subscription school in her claim shack. It was just a plain box house with a dirt floor, and we had to borrow some homemade school desks from a neighboring school district. Then the next year, we went to school in a adobe house that one of our neighbors furnished us for that year. Both schools were only 3 months during the year. Then the third year, the people in my neighborhood got together and organized a school district and built a schoolhouse. I've always been happy that I got to go with the men of the district to the Rock Island Railroad, which had come on from El Reno that same year, and bought lumber and erected our first schoolhouse. And I got to go to school in my own schoolhouse that year. And later, I taught my first 3 years of school in that same district that I helped to build, the schoolhouse. But our schools were short, and I had very little educational opportunities. But when I was 19, there was no high school in the county that had no four-year high school at all. I couldn't have gone if I had been. But the Dutch Reformed Church had a mission in Cordell, the county seat of our county, and they established an academy there in that school, in that town, and allowed me to enroll without any 8th grade diploma or anything at all. Nothing on it. I wanted to go to school, and so I rode horseback the 6 miles we lived from the little town to go to the academy. Now, I remember the first day I had an old bronc that I rode. I tied him up to a fence, put him by a stake rope, and walked up the hill to the academy. I was fairly apprehensive and wondered what to do, but I came alongside of a little boy. I was grown as big as I am now, weighed about 175 pounds, I guess. And I walked up the hill with this little boy in neat pants. He and I later became quite good friends, but he kind of, his friendliness kind of helped to allay my apprehension. Then my brother got to go to school the second semester that year. Then we drove the horse to a buggy to go to school. And our farm had to be, farming had to take part of the land that none of us could ever both now because it's rough land and grassland, and we expected to be small cattle raisers. But every single foot of land, of that rough land, was taken up by settlers, and they voted herd law, and my father had to sell off the surplus cattle, fence our land. We had 3 quarters, and then had to break out some of it to raise feed for the cattle that were in the fence. And our work was hard from the time I was 12, and my brother about 10. We did the work of men about the place. But
Dr. Franklin, during those early days of Oklahoma Territory, would you comment on some of the weather, how both the hot and the cold weather, and what these ruddy pioneers had to do to stay with this country and be successful in making this section of Oklahoma what it is today?
Well, I referred to one storm when we were approaching our county of Ouachita. Then we moved on into our home, and we had this one room above a dugout. My brother and I put up a tent back of the house, and we slept in that. There was a cold winter. I remember one storm, the 14th and 15th of February of 99. We had some canyons of a kind of creek there that had timber on, but the early settlers cut all the trees down, and there wasn't anything to stump left for us to use for wood. We picked up cow chips by the wagon load. My brother and I would go out to get a wagon load, and then I remember that cold spell, 14th and 15th February. It took one of us to stoke the stove with cow chips and carry out the ashes. My grandmother was 75 then, and she sat by the stove to try to keep warm. She sat by the stove all day. Well, the spring finally came, and the first year we had very good weather, and broke out some sod and planted Capricorn and a few other things, but we still had range cattle there, and we had poor fences. So it took us a good part of the time running the range cattle and our own cattle out of the fields. The second year was a good year, and we had a fine corn crop, grew some great watermelons, and had a fine garden. But we did run on several dry years. We had to quit planting corn because it got killed by the drought and the hot winds every year. that we got those flooded Capricorn, and some years that didn't make. But the winters, we didn't have any severe winters then for a while, but for the kind of shelter we had, they would seem severe now. But we raised every year enough feed for our cattle, except later in later years we had to buy some when we didn't have enough to go around.
Dr. Franklin, during those early days, person no doubt had to go through quite a hardship to obtain an education, and to make sure education values, then it must have been a hardship for also the family to get you in school, and also other members of the family. Will you tell us about what early day schooling was like?
Earlier I indicated that we had, for the elementary school, only about 3 months of school a year. I'm not sure, but probably I didn't, my brother and I didn't average more than 3 months a year from the time we came to Oklahoma until I was 19 years old. But after I told about being enrolled in this academy, there was a wonderful faculty from the East, and some of the first college graduates I ever saw came out there to teach in that school. And the only PhD I saw in my life till I was quite old was the president of that little school. But after 3 years of school in that academy, I was a dropout. I tried to get started in a little business. Well, my father and mother stayed on the farm and kept things going while I went to school, but I started too much.
This is a continuation of the tape for Dr. W.A. Franklin, Rock City, Oklahoma. Your interviewer is James Cadigan. Dr. Franklin?
I think I was talking about being a dropout out of school. I had 3 years in this academy and took out and tried to get started in business of my own, but ran into hard times and had to come back to claim at Cordell. But while I was away, I met a girl by the name of Nellie Baker, who was a teacher, and she was willing to take a risk on me, and we were married in August of 1912. And came out to live at my father's claim, and that year was my first year of teaching. I went to a summer normal school and got a certificate to teach, even though I wasn't through high school. But then I taught a year and went back to school this summer and got a second grade certificate and taught 2 more years. At the end of that, it was a terrible dry year. My wife said, "We're going to school." And I said, "How in the world can we ever make it to school? We could hardly live here." She said, "Well, we're going to school." But my father, she said, tried to teach school and farm, and he had a good farm and he couldn't make it. He nearly killed himself, and did kill himself at that. So she knew I was a dropout, but she dropped the dropout back in. And so she said, we're going to Weatherford to school. It's 30 miles away. And I could hardly see how we could do it, but anyhow, she said, we're going to. So I said, how will we make a living? She said, we're going to take Old Star. Old Star was our favorite milk cow. So I went over to Weatherford and rented the house, and then we hitched up a team, a mule and a horse, and we tied Old Star behind the wagon, and in two days she walked that 30 miles to Weatherford. But Old Star gave enough milk and butter for our use, and we sold enough to pay for her food. Then we had some chickens that did about the same way in providing for us. Then we got through the first year of school and went back, and both of us taught that year. And then we went back to school and finished 2 years of school as during the First World War. But at the end of that time, we graduated from that 2 years of school and got our life certificate. From there, we went to Gray County, near Chickasha, and both of us taught for 3 years. And my wife said, we're going to the University of Oklahoma. I'm getting a little ahead of my story, though. This old cow made the trip to Weatherford and back from our farm 3 times, a distance of 160 miles. When we went to Grady County, we didn't have sold the cow to my father. We got down there, we had a campus with 13 acres of Sudan grass on it, and my wife said we have to have Old Star. So we went back, and I bought the Star from my father, and we shipped it by railroad express from Cordell to Chickasha. And we kept it there 3 years in Grady County, and when we got ready to go to the University of Oklahoma, we loaded Old Star in a truck with our piano and kitchen cabinet, which was about all the furniture we had, and moved over to Norman. But the summer before that, I had built a house, a 7-room house, and we lived in that and kept Old Star within about a distance of about 2 blocks of the university, and nobody objected till summertime, and we took her out to the farm. But Old Star put us through 3 years of normal school and finishing high school, and 1 year of university, which was quite a thing for the old cow. At the end of when I got my bachelor's degree in 24, I was employed by the Panhandle A&M College under the direction of the presidency of Dr. A.W. Fanning, and out there I was taught 3 years. And Mr. Fanning said, I'm trying to get the school accredited for a full 4-year college, and I will have to have an advanced degrees. And so he sent me off to the University of Oklahoma, and I got a master's degree in 2 summers and a full year, and some correspondence in between them. Then, but that year, I had a connection with the University of Oklahoma through the Extension Division to do some work in education. But my superior, Dr. J.W. Shepard, was interested in, and he thought that I was a good prospect to help. So we spent part of that summer, that winter, and the next summer, in visiting schools in Sequoyah County, Oklahoma, and trying to do remedial work with children who were slow and backward and not measuring up to the standard of the grades that they were in. But at the end of 1927, went back to Panhandle Indian College with a master's degree, and stayed there 3 years. At the end of 3 years, the political situation in Oklahoma with Bill Murray as the governor was pretty bad. Bill Murray came out to Panhandle Indian College when he was running for office, and he didn't think that Mr. Fanning and the rest of the faculty beat the bushes enough for his election. And so at the end of 1929, he fired me and another member and another faculty member whose father had opposed him in another county. And then at the end of the second year, he fired all the rest of them except one man in that school. But I'm getting a little ahead of my story. I went back, I owned the house at Norman, and so went back to Norman and was employed for 1 year by the Extension Division of Oklahoma University, working with schools. And at the end of that year, the Murray and the Depression almost cut the whole Extension Division out. But I was one of them, the first to go, because I was not an officer anymore. But I continued on as a student, worked as many courses as I could in, and that year I was supervising schools in Canadian County, but ran out of expense money and had to quit. But through the CWA program that President Roosevelt initiated, I was allowed to continue the study of that school. They paid me a small salary and expenses to carry on my study of those schools. We called them individual public schools because we let every child go at his own rate. And I'm glad to say that now I see the fruits of our labor being probably not all together, but other people along the same line in the schools that we have now of the individual public. But I made the trip to these schools and finally worked out a study of 3 of these schools in Canadian County, Oklahoma, and obtained my PhD degree. From there, I came to Ponca City right during the Depression, and for 16 years was a school here at Ponca City, and then 16 years county superintendent of Cary County, Oklahoma. Retired when I was 81.
Dr. Franklin, during all this time, you must have had quite a few experiences while with your school career in the city of Ponca City and while with the Kay County Schools. Would you give us some of your experiences during this time?
I think before I go into that, I ought to do a little more giving credit to my wife and to my parents for their help in letting me go to school. Now, one of the happiest experiences of my life was here in Ponca City. I came here during the Depression. It wasn't happy so far as pay was concerned, but as far as the people of Ponca City are concerned. They welcomed me and gave me as great a boost in getting started as I could expect.
Kay County Schools. Would you give us some of your experiences during this time?
I think before I go into that, I ought to do a little more giving credit to my wife and to my parents for their help in letting me go to school. Now, one of the happiest experiences of my life was here in Ponca City. I came here during the Depression. It wasn't happy so far as pay was concerned, but as far as the people of Ponca City are concerned. They welcomed me and gave me as great a boost in getting started as I could expect. The first 2 years here, I was director of curriculum, and in that we did some experimental work in the 4th grade, beginning in the 4th grade, of group work among the children. They divided in groups, and they each worked at his own level, in reading especially, we were interested in. We did that for 3 years, and then we ran into hard times again, and I was shifted to the 7th grade in junior high school here under the direction of Mr. Lester, Ralph Lester. That I carried on some of my work in individual projects for a while, but it was hard to do because the whole school was not geared to that, and so we gave it up. But for 13 years, I was in that school and made many fine friends and friends especially among the students. And I hope that some of my former students will be taking the course and use this tape. Now, after it was the policy of the school to retire teachers at 65. I reached that advanced age in 1952 and was retired. But before I reached that age, I ran for office of county superintendent of schools of Kay County. And there are 30 rural schools that were left out of 90 or more earlier established. I had, of course, a part of the reason for my starting this school was to try to make the improvement that's needed in rural schools. And so I got the chance to end up my work as it began in rural schools. And while they were so far advanced from the schools of the early pioneer days, the 3-month schools, and practically no library at all, no books except the textbooks. So we had in Kay County, we had 30 schools left, and most of them were two-teacher schools. They had very good equipment and 9-month terms of school. It was my pleasure to work with them for 16 years, and I never had the opposition after I was elected. But some of my most joyous years of teaching these 16 years in the Kay County schools. I visited frequently. I was supposed to visit by law each school twice a year. Well, I visited many of them many times, more than that, and learned to know the teachers and the pupils and to love them. During that time, the children got scarcer all the time, and we ran out of children in 76, and I quit school. When my term of office was over, we had 10 schools instead of 30. At present, there are 5 out of over 90 to begin with, way back in the early days. But Kay County has been a wonderful school county, not only for the rural schools, but the city schools. It's probably one of the best school counties in the state, and I'm happy to end up my days in such a county.
We have just completed an interview with Dr. W.A. Franklin of Ponca City, Oklahoma, for the Living Legends Library in Oklahoma Christian College. The interviewer has been James Cadigan on this Thursday, March 16, 1972.